Tour travel saya namanya Adirga Mini Tour Travel. Dulu macet mas, daerah tanjakan, posisi pulang kerja ataupun tripnya pagi, orang pada berangkat kerja gitu kan. Kita ke Solo 2,5 jam sampai 3 jam. Kalau kita bisa dipotong setengah jam atau 1 jam lewat tol kan bisa terbantukan seperti itu mas. Tapi alhamdulillah kan udah jadi teman-teman klien kita yang ingin trip ke Solo gitu kan 1,5 jam bisa sampai. Zamannya TK atau SD gambar pemandangan ada gunung kita bisa lihat langsung, sebuah daya tarik sendiri gitu mas. Sangat membantu lah kita yang bergerak di bidang travel, itu sangat menunjang sekali gitu mas.
Incredibly warm and welcoming, particularly these meetings. They've been hosted so beautifully, so flawlessly. The arrangements have been fantastic, the locations have been fantastic, and all very smooth. So it's been really one of the most successful meetings I've ever attended.
Cek.
Baiklah Bapak dan Ibu yang kami hormati, kami akan majukan kembali sesi kita pada siang hari ini. Dimohon kesediaan Anda untuk memasuki ruangan ballroom kembali. Sekali lagi kami ingin mengundang kepada Bapak dan Ibu yang terhormat, dipersilahkan untuk segera memasuki area ballroom karena kita akan majukan kembali sesi kita pada siang hari ini. Terima kasih. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite all of you to join us again inside of the ballroom because we're about to continue the next sessions of today. So once again, I would like to invite everyone to please kindly join us inside of the ballroom because we are about to continue our next sessions for today. Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, dan 10. Jangan sampai mati lagi, Mas. Lucu banget nih.
Baik, sekali lagi kami ingin mengundang kepada Bapak dan Ibu yang kami hormati yang masih berada di luar, dimohon kesediaan Anda untuk bergabung bersama dengan kami kembali di area ballroom, karena kita akan melanjutkan sesi kita pada siang hari ini. So ladies and gentlemen, once again we'd like to invite all of you to join us inside of the ballroom again, because we are about to continue with the wrap-up session. Thank you.
Oh ya. Dari kenyataan.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Still in the 8th Annual International Forum on Economic Development and Public Policy. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue with the next sessions. We have the wrap session with the policy discussions on how Indonesia could sustain its economic transformations to become more prosperous country. And for that, I would like to invite the moderator to come on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, give it up for Andini Effendi.
Morning again, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're still pumped up to hear the next session. It's going to be more serious than the first one, but I can assure you that it's also going to be as informative and as insightful as the first one. Without further ado, I would like to invite to the stage Professor Suhasil Nazara, Fiscal Policy Agency from the Ministry of Finance. Professor Suhasil, silakan. And then Ibu Amalia Adininggar Widyasanti atau Ibu Winnie, expert staff for Synergy of Economic Affairs and Financing from the Ministry of National Development Planning atau Bapenas. Ibu Winnie, silakan. Next is Professor Robert Lawrence from Harvard University. Welcome, Professor. And last but not least is Winfred Wicklin from Asian Development Bank. Please give a warm applause for the panel. The second panel of the day will be discussing how Indonesia could sustain the economic transformation to become more prosperous country. So we will explore how the policy setting that is right for Indonesia based on the global trend, and also how can we strengthen our fundamental. It's already strong, but how can we strengthen it better in order to be a prosperous nation? And the biggest threat right now in the global economy is, as we know, we have the trade wars going on, and then also more protectionism is arising. And I guess the first question should be for Professor Lawrence, and I guess Winfred, you can also jump in. What is like the current threat right now in the global economy that could affect the emerging markets, such as Indonesia?
Well, I think the global trading wars are both a threat and perhaps an opportunity for a country like Indonesia. The threat comes from the fact that we have a protectionist American president, on the one hand, who is raising trade barriers against America's trading partners. And we also have an emerging China, which is a state-run or heavily influenced economy, but it's now become the largest economy in the world. And what we have in the trade war are the tensions between these two opposing forces. Now, it's very likely that a lot of the global value chains, which developed over the last 20 years, in which products were made piecemeal around the world, but heavily assembled in China, are now going to start to move to other places because of these trade frictions. And to me, that gives a country like Indonesia an opportunity, because as wages rise in China, as the global value chains start to move, the question is, why would Indonesia not play a major role in attracting those value chains? So on the one hand, there are threats. There's a lot of instability in the system. People are becoming less likely to rely on the global supply chains. But at the same time, I still think they have a future, and I think Indonesia can play an important role in that future.
Winfred?
Well, maybe just as a building on those, on this kind of backdrop of the global environment, what does it mean for Indonesia? And I think what has not changed is the need to further improve, the physical capital, the human capital, the institutional capital, etc. This remains a priority and is continuing. But I think what listening to the discussion over the last day and a half, what seems to have changed or is changing is the view of the role of the state. And And so there are, let me maybe 4 examples which I have in my mind, and many of them were discussed here. For example, the need or the question whether there is a need, and the suggestions that there is a need for a modern industrial policy, which, as Pasua pointed out yesterday, which maybe as, if you come from economic school, you may be very nervous about that. But on the other hand, I think a very strong case has been made that a country like Indonesia may, based on its comparative advantages, increase the complexity of its products and identify niches with a soft-touch modern industrial policy. Second point, the preparedness for AI, automation, AI, for IR, whatever we call it. The government the role of the state is certainly to be prepared for it. What are the implications for Indonesia? What are the opportunities? There are plenty, but there are also risks involved. And how to address these. I think that starts with a better understanding. That then also starts with a setup within I think, the government first, and involving many stakeholders. It involves changing in policy making from the old style, linear, rather time-consuming, and top-down policy making, which is usual in most countries, into one which is much faster and much more agile and much more experimental and also much more consultative, which is required in a fast-changing world of AI. Another point which hasn't been touched on, which I think is important though in the light of the massive infrastructure gaps which are still existing in Indonesia, is the role of state-owned enterprises. So the role of the state through its state-owned enterprises, which are representing 30% of the investments in the country, and 30% of infrastructure investments, I should say, maybe 10% of total investments. What can the government, wants the government do to get more out of the state-owned enterprise in terms of governance arrangements, competition frameworks, etc.? And the last point maybe, which came up several times, the role of the government in improving the enabling business environment, make it easier for businesses to establish themselves, to run, and also to exit the market. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask Ibu Winnie and also Professor Suaz to have a say on what the insights from our 2 speakers. But I would like to remind the audience that you can also submit your questions to our speakers by slido.com, to open it from your browser, and also join the event code. The event code is AIFED 2018. That's AIFED 2018 on slido.com, and submit your questions. I will read them out throughout the discussion. Silakan Prof. Sua dan Ibu Winnie. Tanggapannya, what would you say regarding that? This is an opportunity actually for Indonesia with what's going on in the global scene. So, but the question is, are we ready to take this opportunity?
Yes, I think for the time being, we know that the global economy is already on the peak. And then in the next year, and then in the near medium term, the global growth will be slowing down, that we accepted it. But the thing is that we know exactly that the global engine will be shifted to the emerging economies. And then this will be an opportunity for the Indonesian economy actually, because when we are having, like Indonesia, we are having an opportunity to stabilize our growth. And that will be the right time for us to do and to strengthen our reform efforts. So at this time, it is actually the right momentum for Indonesia to do, to focus more on the longer term growth strategy. So we are not focusing on the cyclical issues, because cyclical issues just for short term, but actually we have a lot of homework to focus more on the longer term growth strategy. So I think this is the right momentum for us to do that, because you know that Indonesian economy is now stabilizing around 5%, but the thing that is that in the future, we don't want to be stuck at 5%.
Yeah.
So meaning that we need to improve our growth potential, and then meaning that we have to reinvent the right longer-term strategy for our economy.
Prof. Sua?
There are some concerns, and I think the way I look at this concerns more on the world economy. I think it's very important if you are the biggest nation in the world, the most powerful one in the world, there are certain responsibility comes with that. And it's very important to realize that. And then I think in the last 50 years, this has been already been tried to put into the WTO, the GATT, and then the UN, the multilateralism, and so on and so forth. Is a dispute settlement mechanism, because not everyone will be in agreement about everything. There are always certain things that need to be. There gotta be some some ways of the settling in the issues. Now, I think if you also listen to what Ibu Sri Mulyani mentioned yesterday, we are at the brink of where those kind of multilateralism is becoming like a more and more vulnerable. So there is the tone that is changing in the latest G20 about that we need to review. It is something that is quite at some point encouraging, but it's also going to be very, very fragile kind of steps that can fail anytime. Now, that's going to happen. That is happening in the middle of the financial sector. That is the US economy, again, the largest one in the world, start to be improving. Fed fund rates start to increase. The fiscal policy in the US is becoming more active, and then absorbing all of the money, all of the financial resources from the world back to the US, which is the US on right. And however, the repercussion impact to the rest of the world should not be underestimated. If we look at the report, I think the impact is very small. I mean, the IMF report and so on says that impact to Indonesia especially is very small. Impact to Indonesia can be from two lines. One is the direct impact from the US to Indonesia because we trade, and that is rather small. The other impact, which is very important, it is more important than this direct impact, is the impact to Indonesia through China. And it's very important because China is Indonesia's largest trading partner. So if China going to be impacted by what happens in the global world, and China will have impact to Indonesia, I think there was a study, but the study is a bit obsolete. I think by obsolete means like 4 years old or 5 years old or so, saying that the 1% decline in China will affect Indonesia 0.3%. I think numbers we can debate, numbers and methodology we can debate, but this impact is very, very real. So with that kind of a background, if the Indonesia is able to grow 5%, 5.2% this year we expect, I think that is quite good enough, especially in this volatile world. Nevertheless, we should not be complacent with that. I think, as just like what Bu Winnie just said, the domestic market is very big. So consumption, investment, and the government-driven growth should be in a more synergy, and it's very important that we understand how to put the synergy between this the household, the business sector, and also and what Pak Winnie just mentioned earlier about the business environment and so on is becoming very, very important.
So you do have concerns regarding what is going on in the global scene with the growing protectionism and also the current trade wars, and I guess there was the first time in history of APEC there's no consensus finalized during the meeting because USA and China do not agree on one thing. So that's kind of big deal. So you do have concerns regarding this, Pak Iswa?
Yes, of course. It's if you look at the way how the world evolves in the last 50 years, a lot of efforts has been put into this trying to synchronize. And of course, is the other word of synchronizing is the dispute settlement, because a country A will do this, country B will do that. Right now, it is quite vulnerable. I think Robert can add, has a lot to add to that as well.
I think you've put your finger on the core problem, which is that the traditional leadership role, which the world has, in which the world has relied, if you will, on America, can no longer be depended on. And so the question now is, what happens next? Maybe a settlement could be reached and America could resume that role. I'm not so optimistic that the trade war that we see currently underway is going to end soon. So I think then the onus turns back to the rest of the world. How will the rest of the world respond? Can they prove, if you will, America is just one country. China has now emerged, ASEAN, other countries. Can they, in a sense, construct institutions that don't depend on the United States, but nonetheless meet their needs? One example, RCEP, doesn't include the United States. If RCEP can really make genuine advances. Another was the example set by the countries who signed TPP, and then the United States withdrew, and they said, no, we still believe in globalization. We still believe in the vision that was represented by that trade agreement. So America, you don't want to be part of it. That doesn't stop us from our commitment to globalization. So I think the onus is now, and then there's China. China has said that it believes in open trade, that it wants to be the leader of this world economy. Well, at the moment, I don't think China's domestic policies are conducive to that leadership role. So it needs to change. So I think we're going through a period of instability and transition, but it's also a period in which now the ball is shifted into the court of the other countries. And they need to become more active, and they need to show that they don't only depend on the United States for leadership. This doesn't come naturally to many countries. And as was pointed out, one problem is many of them still feel poor. And when you are poor and you're an emerging economy, even though you may be large, it's still more likely that you turn inward rather than think about the global economic system. But to me, that is the great challenge. Can the emerging economies now show that they can lead?
Well, Winfred, you're based in Jakarta, so you can answer this question. Are we ready for this transformation, I guess, what's going on? Can we deal with things without the U.S. being as a leader? Do you think that Indonesia is one of the countries that is ready?
Well, I think right now is the time to get the, there are some unavoidable issues, trade war between China and US, etc., which Indonesia can't really influence. So right now really is the time, I think, to focus on the fundamentals, get the your, as I mentioned earlier, your physical, your human, your institutional framework right. Maybe also take advantage in a way from investors that may be looking for to move out of China into other countries in Asia, Southeast Asia. But then where do they go? Do they go to Indonesia or Thailand or Vietnam? So there, Indonesia wants to win the beauty contest, and by getting the fundamentals right. Same with getting ahead of the curve in terms of understanding and addressing the new world of automation and AI, for example. And lastly, I think the point about ASEAN, in many ways, has been working towards readiness for a long time. There's a lot of activity going on. There is, in fact, work going on and an agreement amongst members on a regional level to further diversify the economic and trade structures. You're supporting trade agreements and further improving competitiveness. There's a lot going on which would improve the attractiveness of this huge market that ASEAN represents.
Ibu Winnie, right now Bappenas is tailoring the, what do you call, RPJMN in English, medium-term development plan, 2020-2024. With this upheaval, I guess, in the global scene, and then what kind of like specific policies that needs to be addressed in this RPJMN in order for us to have a strong fundamental with what's going on in the world?
Yes, we are now in the process of preparing our next medium-term plan for our new government. And then actually...
Elected government.
Sorry?
Elected government.
Elected government, our next elected government. And then there is three key points, questions that we have to tackle in the near medium term. The first one that the first question is that how can Indonesia increase its potential growth? Because without increasing potential growth, then we really will not be able to be higher than 5.5%. Because we are now, for example, in 2018, our projection of Indonesian economic growth is about 5.2%. And then next year we have a target that also OECD projected Indonesia will grow about 5.3%. But that 5.3% is not enough for us if we would like to upgrade ourselves to become a high-income country in the future. So our calculation in Bappenas is that if we would like to be a high-income country by 2036, then on average until 2045, our growth rate has to be about 5.7%. So that is our first question. So when we are dealing with increasing and improving our potential growth, meaning that we have to tackle structural policies. So we cannot deal with the cyclical policies anymore. So meaning that structural policy in the near future will be our main concerns. That's the first question. And then the second one is that, the second question, the key question of our development agenda in the future is that, how can Indonesia transform its economic structure? Because if we don't transform ourselves, then we really always rely on commodities. But the thing is that when we are a commodity-based economy, then we will be really vulnerable to the global shocks, to the price commodity volatilities, and so on. So meaning that the transformation of our structure of economy is a must. And then the third one is that how can Indonesia increase its economic productivity? Because if we are not increasing our productivity, we'll be not productive, we'll be not competitive with the other countries, because like what Professor Lawrence says that, so we have to compete with the other emerging economies. So productivity is a key question for us later on, that how can we increase our productivity? It is about labor productivity, it is about capital productivity, but it's all about the supply side of the economy, not the demand side of the economy, because we are talking about the longer term growth strategy. So in this regard, there are three major Indonesian development strategy in the next 5 years, but this is still a draft. The first one, that we need to increase the human capital, for sure. Because human capital will be directed not only on the basic education, basic health, but also we need to improve the quality of human capital, because we need to increase our labor productivity. We need to increase the competitiveness of our human resources. And then the third one, that we need to develop more value-added and more sophisticated of Indonesian manufacturing sectors. Because we would like to have a transformation of our economy. We don't want to just rely much on the commodities. So meaning that we have to transform. When we are transforming, meaning that we have to tackle the issues of our manufacturing sectors. When we are talking manufacturing sectors, that meaning that manufacturing sectors is not, and when we would like to develop the manufacturing sectors, then the policy doesn't mean that it is a manufacturing sector policy. Because when we are going to develop the manufacturing policy, we are talking about the whole issues of structural policies. Because manufacturing policy cannot be solved by only the industrial policy per se, by sectoral. But manufacturing sector have to be developed by the other structural policy, such as providing a better investment climate, and then we also have to provide a good human capital, and also we also need to provide a strong linkage and supportive environment for the industry to grow up, and so on. So manufacturing sector have to be embedded as a part of our structural reform, not only a manufacturing sector policy itself. And then the third one, that we need to strengthen Indonesia ourselves to connect domestically and also to connect globally. Because without connection, a good connection to the global market, then we will get busy with our domestic market, which is not large enough. So we have our manufacturing products later on have also to be connected to our global market, because we also would like to address the issue of current account deficit later on in the future. Thank you.
Okay, Pak Sua, you want to add something about our RPJMN, what needs to be stressed on?
This is very good, and then I think the most important difference between the RPJM in like 15 years ago or 20 years ago, right now, if I heard what the Bappenas is drafting, there is a much bigger possibility that it may actually put into the realization. Looking at what the Indonesia's track record on the policy track record in the last 4 years, there is a possibility. If we have that concept, it will actually realize. The human capital for, infrastructure. I believe that 10 years ago, everyone was like screaming out loud that Indonesia didn't have enough infrastructure in the country. The new administration, President Jokowi came into the office in 2014, and he said, I want infrastructure. And that is actually put into the realization as we are seeing it now. But of course, as a matter of concept, rhetoric, and so on, it is the need of infrastructure has been there in Indonesia for like 50 years or so. But then this is the last 4 years we actually see the massive budget allocation. This is where the Ministry of Finance came into the picture, and we provide the money, we allocate the money, and so now if Bu Winnie says that the Bappenas concept is, after infrastructure, we will build human capital also in a massive way. I think it's very potential. It's very, very possible. We'll put that into place. And of course, that I think I mentioned it yesterday. 20% of the budget on education is a huge amount of money. We have to think about whether we have been using that money correctly, or there should be more than on the how, rather than on the how much money that we have to spend. I think the lessons from the private sectors, the lessons from the young influencers that we put on the stage this morning, that should give us like more inspirations. Sometimes I ask the question, is the Indonesia Mengajar or the whatever other initiatives, can it be scaled up for the whole Indonesia? I think it should be possible. Of course. Then the next question is, why the Kemendikbud cannot adopt that? Why the Kemendikbud also, if you look at there is one very simple example. There is an app which is called the Ruang Guru. Yeah. Then I actually asked the founder, can you scale it up? And then at the same time, I asked the Ministry of Education and Culture, especially the one on the communication. I'm sorry, I apologize. Ruang Guru is an app. It's an app you can download from your smartphone, and that can actually assist the elementary school students to study at home rather than going to like a private lessons somewhere, physically they can do it, and then the parents can also be part of that app, so that the parents can also control what the children at home is actually doing as a supplement to what they have in the regular school. So then I asked the Ministry of Education, are you aware of this? And then they mentioned, oh, we also have that kind of apps. Okay? So this is not very surprising. Oh, we also have that kind of apps. Then having those answer, I asked them, then why your apps is less favorable than the Ruang Guru apps? There must be something that the government must change and must, this is more like a mindset. Rather than the mindset of finishing what has been allocated in the budget, it is a mindset about the customer-oriented, people-oriented, whether this is actually is used by the people and so on. So the human capital, education money, 20% of the budget, $30 billion should be used to attract more of the participation of the different elements of the country. So there is a possibility, if Bu Winnie says human capital, it's a possibility that we will nail that. If Bu Winnie says the productivity, I mean the structural reform, and I think it's very important. It's not sectoral. This is the structural reform. I think yesterday there was also a presentation about it is not about the sectors, it is about the activities. I think that is, we also have to pay attention to that notion as well from the yesterday's presentation. I'm optimistic, but of course this is not easy work. A lot of we have to do in the future.
Okay, I would like to hear from you, Professor Lawrence. You've heard about our big plan in human capital, and then reviving manufacture, and then also the advancement of technology. But also, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. Political stability. Is it also important for a dynamic democracy such as Indonesia? And you can also jump in, Winfred, please.
Well, in a sense, I think political stability is necessary, but there are some adverse effects of stable politics, which is it sometimes creates insiders and outsiders. And to me, the emphasis on human capital is right. The emphasis on logistics was right, but they are necessary but not sufficient. When we talk about human capital, as was just mentioned, it's as much about quality as it is about quantity. And I would suggest that when we talk about infrastructure, it's as much about having the port, but also how well does it operate? What are the conditions of competition in that port? If there is enough competition in the port, the prices will be low. It doesn't matter how many ports you have if the operators have monopolies. So to me, what we need to add to this vision is how do we introduce more competition into the economy so that we encourage new entrants, those with new ideas, like we heard this morning in the shoe area. We want growth actually does come from structural transformation, but heavily it comes from innovation and from newcomers. If you look at the companies in the United States today who dominate the market, they didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. So you need to create an environment of stability, yes, provide a framework, but you also need to create an environment that nurtures change, that encourages entry, that induces competition. One way to get more competition is to integrate more with the rest of the world. I think the natural tendency in Indonesia is to hunker down and to try to preserve the domestic market. Well, you won't get rich on your domestic market, as we just heard. So the question is, how do you become competitive in a global market? And that requires more open policies than I think you have currently. So there's a set of steps that need to be taken, in my view, to supplement the good policies that have been implemented. And I just want to say one final word when it comes to structural change. To me, as I said yesterday, the big structural opportunity facing Indonesia today, and I rarely hear anyone mention it, is agriculture. How do you make your agricultural sector more productive? Because I look at the living standards and the levels of output per worker in agriculture, and they are significantly lower than in the rest of the economy. So actually, Indonesia, while there's a lot of talk about a middle income trap, Indonesia hasn't completed the earlier stage of development when people move off the farms and into industry. And by the way, if you have richer farmers and more productive farmers, those who remain will have more buying power and will enhance the domestic market. So I think changing the structure of the economy should emphasize trying to make the industrial sector less dependent on primary commodities, but also emphasize improvements in productivity in the agricultural sector and bringing these new technologies into making the services sector more productive.
Winfried?
Yeah, I think in terms of political stability, clearly you want to kind of emancipate politics from policy, or rather the other way around, policy from politics. I think very important is the policy consistency in policy making, and then working away along the lines that that other colleagues just outlined, working away on your infrastructure, try to improve the particularly in terms of policy consistency and government work, get the planning right, get the regulatory framework right, the project preparation and the implementation in the area of human resource development, education, strengthen, just as example, strengthen the outcomes on the ground by, for example, working on better accountability between revenue on the national level and expenditure on the subnational level, which often does not match very well, as well as on economic policies, which we discussed before.
Okay, so we proceed to your questions that have been submitted to Slido. So the first one, we are worried with the human capital right now in Indonesia that with low-skilled labor, they are in the working age, formal education is not relevant for them. So how to catch up with this issue? The first one, how to catch up with the fact is in Indonesia, there are more low-skilled labor and education is not mandatory for them because they rather work than going to school. So how to catch up with this?
Yes, if you look at our employment data, this is true that our employment in manufacturing sector is declining, and then there is like a shift between employment in the agriculture to the services sector. And then the thing is that because a services sector is not really sophisticated compared to the manufacturing sector, then absorption of the employment in the services sector is more on the low-skilled level compared to the high-skilled level. So like, for example, Gojek, right? Gojek doesn't need a more complicated graduate or technician or engineering students, but they only need a low-skilled labor is just enough. So in the future, if you want to have a more productive labor and then more skilled labor to have this one, then we need to upgrade our manufacturing sector. We develop the manufacturing sector, and in the same time, we also need to improve our vocational training as well. Mm-hmm. So meaning that the need from the manufacturing sector can be matched with the supply side of our labor market by
Right.
providing a vocational training which is matched to the need of the manufacturing sector.
If the opportunities are bigger,
Yes.
that requires a highly skilled labor, then the demand will be there as well,
Exactly.
right? Okay, so the second question is, what will be the best long-term strategy for Indonesia to strengthen the macroeconomic stability in a vulnerable world economy? I guess that's for Professor Lawrence and Winfred. The third one, the third one.
I'm sorry, I was reading the third, yeah. Um, you know, I am not an expert on Indonesia, but when I actually look at the macroeconomic performance of the country, I would say it's a great strength. I am struck that the ability to maintain 5% growth, which you're not happy with, you're not satisfied with, but is quite remarkable in global context. And you've maintained it over the last 20 years. I think, I joked, I think the easiest job in the world is probably the macroeconomist who has to forecast India's growth rate for next year, because it's going to be 5 point something. Well, that is pretty stable. So I think, in fact, if we look back, you're doing something right when it comes to macro. There is an achievement of low inflation, a reasonably low inflation rate, and a stable growth rate. And so I think the emphasis here, which has been on structural transformation, enhancing the productivity potential of the economy, is the right place to emphasize, because you're doing the other stuff rather well.
Basua, you want to add?
I really hope that my friends from the media really catch what Robert has just said. I think it's that's what we have been trying to do. The macroeconomic stability is a prerequisite for a good long-term development. Without macroeconomic stability, forget it. So sometimes I still get this question: stability over growth? Question. The answer is always stability. And with the stability, there will come growth. But the growth that we have now is not enough. But then the macroeconomic stability of Indonesia is very stable, is very sound. Credit growth at 12%, non-performing loan at 2.6%. It's very solid. But however, the structure, if we look into deeper, it's quite challenging. The relationship between this macro with the micro level, and that's really the root of this first question. Formal education is not really how do we catch up and so on. But I would like to make a final comment about the agriculture, Robert. And I think I agree 100%. I think Indonesia is kind of overlooked the more efficiencies that we can get from a much more modern agricultural sector. However, there is this sentiment among the population that if the number of farmers are declining, that is as if the government is not keeping the welfare of the farmers. Our view is that the less number of farmers, more product, more productivity. But then this is something that we have to manage. I think Ibu Menteri also mentioned yesterday, a lot of things that we have to manage, the balance between the perception and the statistics and the real development, productivity and the welfare.
People are now obsessed, in my view, with the likelihood that work is going to disappear because they think the machines are going to take over. Well, suppose the year was 1870 and we were in the United States and 40% of us were working on the farms. And I came and told you, actually, in 100 years or more, there are going to be 2% of the Americans who are working on the farms. You would have said, work will disappear. We need somehow, what are we going to do with all those people because of the productivity growth? Well, in fact, what happened was, it was a challenge. We had to take the people who were farmers and we had to educate them. And that's why America developed, universal free education. And we equipped the people then for the new jobs that were becoming available because farmers were becoming more productive. And so simultaneously, you need both. That's how you do structural change. And that's why, when I look to the future now, there's the same kind of concern about those machines. And I think you could have been having exactly the same conversation 100 and 150 years about the farmers. And I think it was foolish to think, and arrogant to think, that you knew what the future would mean when it came to those people moving off the farm. But what you had to do was to equip them for the changes which were going to come. And so if I leave with one idea, the real challenge is how we equip mainly the youth, but our people to face the challenges that lie out there in the future.
So we're having a deja vu, I guess, in a way, based on what happened in 1890. So I guess, I know that you have to leave, Ibu Winnie. You want to have a final remark before we proceed to Winfred? You're good? Okay, so Winfred, please.
Thank you. Just maybe a quick point on the question of skills development. One of the two underfunded areas in the education sector is technical vocational education. So this clearly a critical area that needs more funding. But especially also, it needs much more linkages between the schools. There are really good schools out there, and the private sector. I found, I'm relatively new to the country, but my little experience, there is very little dialogue going on between the schools and private sectors, and the schools need to know what is relevant for the industry. And that point becomes even more important, of course, in a world of automation and AI. The other area, of course, that is underfunded is early childcare, which is an issue in itself, and maybe related to that also the importance of moving away from rote-based learning to more cognitive skills. Again, this is to get the young people ready for new skills required, critical thinking required for in an industrial in a fourth industrial revolution. And last point, maybe the on education and skills, the critical role of teachers, especially school principals, which how to build the capacity of the teachers and their leadership, the principals, to equip them with the knowledge about new technologies, which they should talk about and teach to the kids. So these are some of the challenges that are changing over time, and with all the new developments coming up. Thank you.
Okay. So in order to enhance our human capital and also reviving the manufacturing sector, and also to have an advancement in technology, we gotta have the right structural change policy. I guess that's what Professor Lawrence mentioned. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you. Please give a warm applause for our speakers this morning. I hope you have an insightful information regarding our session, our two sessions this morning. Acara saya kembalikan ke MC, silakan.
Thank you very much to all the speakers and moderator, and please kindly remain on stage. And also Professor Suhasil Nazara will give the token of appreciation to the other speakers, to Mrs. Amalia, to Mr. Robert.